Find the derivative of f of t equals t squared sine t plus t squared cosine t, then evaluate f prime of pi over 4. F of t is made up of two terms, t squared times the sine of t, a product, plus t squared times the cosine of t, also a product. Each of those terms will require a product rule for the derivative. F prime of t will be, for the first term, t squared sine t, a product rule, derivative of the first, derivative of t squared, bring the 2 down, subtract 1 from the exponent, 2t times the second left alone, sine t, plus the first left alone, t squared, and the derivative of the second, derivative of sine of t, is cosine of t. All of that is just the derivative of the first term using the product rule. Now we'll take the derivative of the second term, t squared cosine of t, again using the product rule. Derivative of the first part of it, t squared, derivative of t squared is, bring the power down, subtract 1, 2t, times the second left alone, plus the first left alone, t squared, times the derivative of the second derivative cosine of t, which is negative sine of t. So f prime of t is 2t sine of t plus t squared cosine of t plus 2t cosine of t minus t squared sine of t. The next step is to evaluate f prime of pi over 4. We're going to plug pi over 4 in for each of the t's. 2 times pi over 4 times the sine of pi over 4 plus pi over 4 squared times the cosine of pi over 4 plus 2 times pi over 4 times the cosine of pi over 4 minus pi over 4 squared times the sine of pi over 4. 2 times pi over 4 will be 2 pi over 4. The sine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. Plus pi over 4 squared will be square the pi and square the 4, pi squared over 16. The cosine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. Plus 2 times pi over 4 is 2 pi over 4. The cosine of pi over 4 is square root of 2 over 2. Minus pi over 4 squared, square the pi, pi squared, square the 4, 16. Pi squared over 16, and the sine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. Two of these terms will cancel. They're equal value but opposite sign. The second one and the fourth one. So let's just cancel those out. The remaining two terms, since they're multiplied, we can cancel the 2 here and here, and we can cancel the 2 here and here, one from the numerator, one from the denominator. That will give us root 2 pi over 4 plus another root 2 pi over 4. They're already over a common denominator, so we can add them together. 2 root 2 pi over 4, in which case we can cancel out the 2 with the 4 in the denominator. They're both divisible by 2. Cancel that down to a 2, and we can write it as root 2 pi over 2.